Okay, thank you very much. First, I am a Syrian academic coming from Lancaster University, and I would like to thank IIH for their efforts to raise awareness about the sufferings of more than 7,000 women in Assad regime, in Assad prisons. Of course, there is no need to emphasize that what started as a mass peaceful demonstration across Syrian cities asking for democratic change was violently cracked down by the regime. It was in that very moment of March 2011, where both men and women, for the first time in many decades, that notions of freedom, democracy, dignity, and representation were explicitly aspired for. The Arab uprising was not only about a question of democratic change on the political level, but also an inspiring moment for Syrian women to ask for their personal and political freedoms. This brings us to the questions of how was the Ba'ath regime dealing or treating Syrian women before the 2011 uprising. It's well known that the Ba'ath regime has always represented itself as a seemingly secular regime that aims to promote women's rights and equality. However, in practice, this regime has imposed a national ideology that is masculine and gender biased. The Ba'ath ideology is based on gratifying sacrificial heroism and militarism as the basis of what defines notions of citizenship, national membership, and belonging. Therefore, there is a propagated cult of fighting and killing as means to support the regime's survival. Having this militaristic and masculine ethos as the defining characteristic of what makes a citizen, the regime has legitimized use of violence against women even before 2011. This lack of recognition of women in Syria as equals to men is manifested or can be manifested in many articles of the penal law and nationality law. Some of these articles legitimize and normalize the use of violence against women. Others disregard women's right to give her citizenship to her children. Of course, after 2011, it was a national movement with no clear or explicit gender-specific agenda, but rather an aspiration for transitioning to democracy for both men and women. Now, the pressing question is that after 2011, this militaristic and authoritarian regime has used women as a pressure card to suppress any social mobilization or political activism. But it's also important to understand that this regime is using women to upgrade its authoritarianism and re-legitimizes its authority through using women. This is through tokenizing women and bringing them to the fore as part of the regime's claim to gender equality. This gives you a clear idea that women are used and mobilized by the regime whether for rehabilitation, legitimacy purposes, or to suppress Syrian civil movement. In light of such ideological basis of this regime and with the existential threat this regime faced in the wake of mass protests in 2011, severe repressive measures were used to ensure its survival. These violence measures created the worst humanitarian crisis in history. Therefore, this 8 years of chronic war has killed more than 450,000 civilians and more than 6 million displaced in the country, another 5 million migrating outside the country. Women and children constitute the majority of people who lost their lives. Women and children are the most affected, with more than 13,500 women that have been imprisoned in Syria so far. And more than 7,000 women are still being tortured even while I'm speaking, raped and subjected to various inhuman torture. The Syrian regime has used rape as a tool of coercion and intimidation. Now, in order to break the cycles of violence and impunity that have destabilized the Syrian societies in the last 4 decades, and particularly the last 8 years, there is a need to support a Syrian-led and implemented transitional justice process. And this is because transitional justice is the means through which Syria can confront its past and start the process of rebuilding a sustainable peace. It's also important to note that building strong political structures, restoring the rule of law, and securing a foundation for reconciliation initiatives, we need to empower and restore the dignity of victims. Our first step towards establishing peace is emphasizing that women detainees are not numbers but humans who have to be released immediately and with no conditions. Also, To create a sustainable peace, we need not to forget that the cost of impunity and lack of accountability for what happened in the 1970s and 1980s should not be repeated. So, in my opinion, that some of the demands that should be made by us, or we ask the UN, is that first, immediate release of Syrian women and children with no conditions, so there is no need, there should be no politicization of the women detainees inside. The UN must ensure the realization of effective measures to protect women and children in the Syrian conflict, establishing a culture of accountability that would ensure the prevention from acts of revenge and retaliation. And accountability should include those directly responsible for crimes, those who ordered or encouraged the crime, and the widespread abuse of human rights, and also the institutions that facilitated those practices. Lastly, I need to confirm that in order for the Syrian society to overcome a legacy of large-scale past and current abuses, the UN, Syrian independent institutions and NGOs, and other effective regional actors, there is a need to ensure the implementation of effective measures to establish accountability, serve justice, and achieve reconciliation. This cannot be achieved without stopping the Assad regime and its allies from violating human rights through kidnapping, raping, and abusing women. My final message for today is to be in the words that is given from a woman's survival, now an activist for peace and accountability. Her name is Amina Kholani. She is one of those organizers for Families for Freedom, and she has two messages for you. The first, in her own words, I'm reading, "In fact, it's hard and very difficult to get a sense of what a freedom or a human dignity means when my friends are still imprisoned and have unknown destiny." Her second message is that there cannot be a realization of peace or establishing of peace without holding those who killed my 3 brothers accountable. Finally, as a Syrian academic, I am aware of the many talks regarding reconstructing Syria. And while these talks include funding projects to build the destroyed cities, the regime is reconstructing Syria through rebuilding the status of Bashar al-Assad's father. Of course, the regime is trying to promote national unity through reconstructing these states in an attempt to emphasize that survival of the nation is synonymous with the survival of Assad family. Such policy is intended to break victims' dignity and humanity. It prevents any future establishment of peace or accountability and weaken the sense of confidence in the international system. More importantly, it's a symbolic act to violate millions of Syrians' aspiration for freedom, democracy, and most importantly, their desire to return to Syria. Therefore, lastly, and I just conclude with these words, reconstructing Syria, whether by international actors or by rehabilitating this regime, should only start after thousands of women and children and also men are released unconditionally. Thank you.